And Richie.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Right. Okay. So okay, fine. So what we did, let's just very briefly and in a relatively straightforward. What we're trying to do is basically find the Gemora is trying to locate the source for the din of chazaka of 3 years. Right. We explained that there are two ways of approaching the sugi in general. Are we looking for the whole concept of chazaka, or the fact that chazaka is 3, or the idea of 3? But either way, we're looking for a source for it. And we spent this first omud of the Gemara working through a particular approach that is based on shor hamud. You find 3 times the ox gores, it becomes a goring ox, and therefore it changes its status. Instead of a presumption that it's a safe ox, there's a presumption now that it's a dangerous ox. Now, you learn the concept of change in status after 3 times. That's basically in a nutshell, right? But the conclusion of the Gemara was that only works according to Rabbi Yishmael. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Yishmael says that when it comes to a fruit-producing tree or trees that produce fruit, then you don't look at years. You don't look at years. You look at 3 different types of 3 different types of crops. So, for example, you could be bringing in olives and grapes and whatever, and you do 3 different crops, 3 different types. That is enough of a chazaka. Okay, and the Gemara fundamentally wanted to say that that just as shor hamud, it's not a time thing. It's not to do with a time frame. It's just 3 occasions or 3 occurrences. If you learn from the shor hamud to the concept of chazaka in terms of assumed ownership or the ownership rights, it should be 3 occasions that are nothing to do with time. They could be quite close together. We went through this whole thing. We bought there's a type of tree called the tzlaf, the caperberry, which produces its fruit quite quickly, so you get 3 crops quite quickly. Went through, sort of meandered all the way through there until we got to the conclusion of saying basically it only works according to Rabbi Yishmael, that approach. And therefore, we have to understand what is the din according to the Rabbanon. Rabbanon do not hold of Rabbi Yishmael, the Rabbanon in our Mishnah, and they say that you have to have chazaka for 3 years. 3 as a time frame. It's got to be 3 years, right? So what's the source for them that it is? What is the source for them that for this whole idea of chazaka? Yeah, you had a question, Jeremy? What? No, I don't know. Don't think we do. Yeah, so we saw. Yeah, well, it works as a source according to Rabbi Yishmael, but it's not going to help us. We're not going to help the Rabbanon. Not relevant. No, of course it's relevant. What do you mean? We're still interested in Rabbi Yishmael. No, but we want to help. We want to help Rabbi Yishmael and have to understand where we got it from. Very important. Even if we don't pass on that, okay? Yeah, that's how it is. So, what? Shor hamud is caused in the Torah. We're not discussing that. We're saying, is that relevant to us, to the case of the land? That's the question. Can it be used as a source for the land? We're not discussing shor hamud. That's fine. That's safe, right? So Gemora says Rabbanon Mai. Now, Amar Rav Yosef. Yosef says, sorry, 4 lines from the bottom of the Amud. So Chof Ches Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom of the Amud. The 3rd word on the line. The Rabbanon Mai. According to Rabbanon, what is the source? Amar Rav Yosef. Yosef says, Kroksiv. It's a pasuk. It's a pasuk. The pasuk says in Yirmiyahu, which we happened to learn in last week's Haftarah. We only learned it in a leap year. I think we did it in last Haftarah. I better get that sure that's right. Actually, what? Anyone know this? Stodness by case of what? 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 And Shabbos. Shabbos was, I mentioned it when I spoke about it. I mentioned it, but I'm just checking 100% that this pasuk is actually in there. I'm almost certain it is. Sodos Bakesef Yiknu. Go. It says seconds. Chesed Yom Rabim. Well, it's either in the Haftarah or it's just before, and the next pasuk we're going to bring from the Haftarah. It's the same bit, basically. You'll see that where Yirmiyahu is told, right, Sodus bakesef yiknu. You're going to buy fields, pay for money, buy fields with money. Because of the safe, write in a safe of a chosum and seal it, right? And Kosten said, you can leave it open, there's a bit of air. No, unless anyone has an objection, not to be COVID, just some pressure. Kosten chosum, right? And write in a safe of chosum and seal it. Okay, and seal it. Now, this is the key point, right? Shahari Novi Omed Be'eser. Rashi goes through this and how this works out. But essentially, the Novi, Yirmiyahu, is in the 10th year of the reign of Tzidkiyahu, right? I mean, this is basically right at the end of the period of the, before the Churban Abayis, 10th year of Tzidkiyahu. And he's telling them, he's warning them about the 11th year, and he's telling them that they need to make sure that they write, they write proper documents, they have proper documents and witnesses for the fields. Okay, why? Because they're going to be exiled in the 11th year. So you've got the 10th year and the 11th year, and they're going to be going to Golus. They're going to go into Olive, and they're not going to have 3 years. So it's seemingly a brilliant proof. You understand? And you're always telling the people, listen, guys, if you buy fields now, you're going to have a problem because you're only going to have 2 years, and then that's it. You're off to Bovril. So you haven't got 3 years. So it's a good proof that you need 3 years. That's why he's telling them, make sure you write shtaros. Keep your documents because you're not going to have 3 years. That seems to be a good proof for Chazaka, right? Well, it's not a harvest-based thing. He's saying, yeah, he's saying it seems to be that 2 years is not enough, and you have to get to the 3 years. Look, the Gemara's not going to stick with this, so that's why I think you could pull this apart in various ways. You could ask on various things on it, but this is the Gemara's suggestion. Let's see Rashi here to understand this, because the Gemara's going to remove it in a minute. But let's see these Rashis. So it's the third last Rashi. The Rabbanon deleslu hold Rabbi Shmuel, manalu chazaka the shalosh shonim. The Rabbanon who don't hold a Rabbi Shmuel, how do they know chazaka 3 years? Hachi garasinon shahari novi, because the novi is shahari novi omeid. The Novi is in the 10th year, and he is warning about the 11th year. Rashi goes through this. Yirmiyahu in the 10th year of Tzidkiyahu, he was imprisoned in what's called the Chotzer HaMatorah. That was the area, the name of the place that Yirmiyahu was in prison. Yirmiyahu had a very difficult time. There it talks about that was the Haftarah. Okay, that was where it was said to him. And it says there, and it says there they should buy fields with money, and they should write it in the document. Make sure they write their documentation out in a proper way. So he was warning. Who was he warning? He was warning those who buy fields, lichtov shtaros, to write documents, or lahamid edim b'chasimos, to make sure they get edim, proper witness to the signatures, etc., etc. Ki yiglu min ho'er b'shana achas esrei, because they're going to be exiled from the city in the 10th year. When the city is captured, they're not going to end up having having it for 3 years. Only the 10th and the 11th year. The Bach changes the text here a bit. And when they return from exile, I'm just doing the Bach number. If the sellers come to take it out from your hands, because you haven't had a chazaka for 3 years, you'll be able to put out your shtaros, but to kaim biyedchem, and it will be established in your hands. Bach adds in a whole lot here. Alma, so you see, back to Rashi, bahani tartishnin, these 2 years, lo yabe chazaka, is not chazaka. Mekan chazaka she'eno pechusa mishalosh shonim. Here you see, the chazaka is certainly no less than 3 years, because 2 years was not good enough. That's what we're just to prove that. Omale Abai says Dilma Hosameitza Tova Kamash Malon. It's no real proof from there. It could have been just a good piece of advice. Yeah, because it's a good idea to have documents and make sure that people can't cause problems. Keeping documents is usually a good idea. So, it's just an Eitz Tova, it's a good piece of advice. Top of the next Amud. Because if you don't say that, then what does Yirmiyah mean when he says elsewhere, a few prokim earlier, Banu Batim, Shavu, Venatu Ganus? He says, build houses and go and plant gardens, Va'achlos Pirion, and eat their fruit. This is where Yirmiyah sends an instruction to those who had already gone into Golus. Yechonia, it's quite complicated, the kings at the end, right at the end for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. It's quite complicated because Yechonia goes into Golus, into Babel already 11 years before Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu was the very last king. He's the one who's blinded. Remember, Tzidkiyahu was blinded. He escapes through a tunnel, and he's blinded by Nebuchadnezzar. So he was the very, very last one at the time of the Churban. But there was a king who was exiled earlier, and there was a whole lot who, basically all the prominent citizens went into Bavel a long time. They were called the Cheresh V'Hamaska. They were basically the prominent members of society. I think tradesmen and others. I think it's understood to be a reference, perhaps, to the Talmidei Chachamim. They all went into Golus earlier, before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So he told them, Yirmiyahu, make yourselves at home in Bavel, right? Settle down, build houses, plant trees, eat their fruit. Why? Because you've got 70 years, guys. You told them, you're not coming back quickly. And there's no point like sort of setting up a tent city and saying, well, we're only going to be here a couple of years because we're going to go back soon. It's going to be 70 years, he told them. I'm sorry to tell you, but you're going to be a while. And so therefore, Micah Omar, what's he telling them? Well, obviously, you don't have to. If you don't want to, if you don't want to buy a house, then don't buy a house, right? If you want to sit in a tent for 70 years, it's an Eitz Tova. It's a good piece of advice, right? I'm advising you to settle down in Bavel because you're going to be there for a while. Yeah.
Well, wasn't the original thinking behind Pesach the bottom is not that they weren't stars, but they'd been lost.
Well, the point about they would have been lost. The point about not so much they've been lost. We wouldn't expect you to keep your documents longer than that. So the Gemara's suggestion was that why Yirmiyah was telling them to write documents down? Because you will require them. Why? Because after 3 years, if you've been there for 3 years, the documents are not so important because you're not expected to have kept them that long. But you're not going to be there that long. You're only going to be there 2 years, right? But the Gemara says that's no proof. It's no proof that after 3 years you don't need documents. It could be that Yirmiyah was just advising them to keep documentation, just in a piece of advice. He's not saying to them, you have to have documents in 2 years because otherwise you will end up losing your field because someone will take it away, implying that after 3 years you wouldn't need those documents. He's just giving them advice and saying it's not related to the din of chazaka of 3 years. He's just advising them to write documents.
Yeah, no, so why is the Gemara bringing this quote?
That's the point. The point is it's no proof. That's the Gemara is now saying that's no proof.
But I'm saying why would you even thought it was proof?
Because you could have learned it that Yirmiyahu was insisting on, not as a piece of advice, but specifically telling them, because you're only going to be 2 years, you're never going to have chazaka. And therefore, you're going to have documents that you're going to keep for many years, because otherwise you're going to lose. You won't have had chazaka for 3 years on those fields.
So chazaka is not something you start out thinking, right, I'm just going to go on this field 3 years and I've got chazaka. You need the shtaros in the first place. The chazaka is only there's supposed to be data.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, but why would you think that in the first place?
Yeah.
70 years, so when you come back, you need to start.
You mean it's the normal thing would anyway be to start off with a star.
Yeah, exactly.
With the star. That's the whole point. You would start off with a star.
The point is that you're arguing that you could either be the end or
3
years.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
Okay, it's your soda.
Yeah.
You can work on it.
Well, it's not. You can
argue that you don't. The point you were making was that it could have been argued X, Y, and Z.
It could have, it could have been. It could have been argued that Yirmiyahu was emphasizing it in this case because they would be particularly important, that they'd have to keep these shtaros for many, many years. It's true. I hear what you're saying, but it could have been argued that way. Like I said, I don't think the Gemara spends long on this because it doesn't hold with it. It doesn't go with it anyway, right? It says you can just say it's a piece of advice, just like we say over there. He was just advising them. Ochanami says the Gemara, you're just a piece of advice. Teda, and I'll prove to you that Yirmiyahu was just giving a good piece of advice. Because the pasuk also says over here in Yirmiyahu, in Sefer Yirmiyahu, it says, you should put them in an earthenware vessel so that it lasts for a long period of time. Now, what on earth is he telling them that for? That's not a halacha. You don't have to. It's clearly advice. Yirmiyahu is giving them good advice. You want to make sure that your things don't wear out, the documents, they stay strong, whatever. So you put them in an earthenware vessel. That wasn't asked with there as well. Yeah, put them in an earthenware vessel. That's what we do with Sifrei Torah. If they're buried, they put in a kli cheres. I think we learn it from there. Put in an earthenware vessel. It seems to protect them for a long period of time, climate control and stuff. Anyway, that's what it is. So let's see Rashi on this. There's one Rashi at the bottom of the previous Amud. Could be a chazaka is 1 year, just 1 year. Maybe that's 1 year. Who says it's 3 years? Maybe it's just 1 year. And it's just giving a piece of advice. His document should be in his hand, ready as a proof. And he won't require witnesses when they ask him questions. When people ask him questions, you won't have a problem. See, that's really where Rashi really kind of comes to answer your point. And you could say that that this is just a piece of advice, and therefore, 2 years is not. It's not a proof that it has to be because it's only 2 years. Therefore, it's not good enough chazaka. It could be 1 year is good. It could be 1 year is good enough as chazaka. And why was he emphasizing to keep the right documents? Just because that's a good thing to do, sensible advice. Harishalach Yirmiyah la'osin shoyba Bovel. Top of the next summit, Rashi. Yirmiyah sent to those who are already in Bovel. Shegolom Yechonyo exile with Yechonyo Yud Alaf Shana Kodim Golos Tzidkiyahu 11 years before Tzidkiyahu's exile. Bonu Botzim V'Shavu. He told them to build houses and settle down. Kilo Teitzum Misham Ad Velos LeBovel Shivim Shana. You're not going to leave until it fulfills to Bovel for 70 years. Lomalei Lasira Malzos. Why did he have to warn them about this? Elaita Tova. Oh yeah, it was just a good piece of advice. He was advising them. He was just a good piece of advice. Teda, you should know, says Rashi, that his whole purpose was to give them a good advice. To Kamalu, because he said to them, Nami as well, he told them good places where you can keep your documents safe. So it was a good piece of advice. Don't have to, but I'm telling you, this is a good advisable thing to do. It's interesting, that same part of Sefer Yirmiyah, when he advises, I believe that when he advises the what they need to do in Bovel, is also the first source that we have for the idea of being mispalel shlomo shel malchus. Because Yirmiyah says to them, if my memory serves me correctly, we've got Tanakh. Says to them, you should settle down. Yirmiyah says to them, you should settle down, and build houses. And then he said, where is it? A second. We should settle down, have families, etc., etc. You should seek the peace of the city that you've been exiled to. And you should daven on its account to Hashem. Because if there's peace in that city, you too will have peace. It's an amazing thing. It's the very first time after the Churban that we're exiled. We're not living in our land. And the very first occasion, we're told, be good citizens. Yeah, daven for the Shlomo Malchus. Right? You're going to be there. Be respectful. Think about where you are. Think about the context. Think about the citizens. Daven for the ruling powers. It's amazing, right? They think about it. They just like dragged us into exile. To God. It's not like a Malchus Shel Chesed, but that's what it says. The very first time. That's the original source for the idea. So the Gemora says like this. Now the Gemora is going to move away from the suggestion that you can prove it from a posuk, that you can bring a support from a posuk, either from the Torah or from Tanakh, Shara Muad, or from Yirmiyahu, and going to go from the realm of logic. Rava like this. Rava says there's a logical reason for it. The first year, person generally forgives someone else eating the fruit that he owns. First year. No, first year, like 1 year. Oh, so this guy's got my field for 1 year, and he's busy consuming the fruit. Not the end of the world. I can let it go. Tarti mochil, 2 years. He also lets it go. Yeah, all right, 1 second. Tlas, you're thinking. Tlas, 3 years. 3 years low mochil. 3 years he's not mochil. Okay, 3 years. It's, in other words, it's his human psychology. 3 years we can assume there is no way anyone will be mochil someone else benefiting from their property for 3 years and not say anything. That's Rav's first attempt at a logical approach, right? Very simple, very simple. We were trying to establish who is the owner of the land, and we say like this: this man can prove, Scott Adim, that he's been there for 3 years. He argues and says, "You sold it to me." And this man disputes it, the seller, the procedure. What do you mean? I didn't sell it to him. So we turn around to him and say, hold on a second. You're telling me that you let this guy, you didn't say anything for 3 years, nothing. You let this guy sit in your land, right, for 3 years, consume, 3 years worth of harvests or whatever, okay? And you said nothing? Do me a favor, right? No one would do it. We could see 1 year, maybe he's got a lot of property. It doesn't matter, so I'll let the guy go. So he'll have the fig tree. I've got olives, I've got grapes, whatever. I'll let him have the fig field. There could be context and circumstances we're saying. That person's not 1 year, 2 years, he's not so bad. Therefore, we could say that at that stage, he's still got believability. When he turns up in Based and said, this guy stole it from me, yeah, he still could be believed. It could be it's true. Why did he not object? Because he was Michael, but after 3 years, but no one is going to allow his property to be someone to sit in his land for 3 years and just let it go. And therefore, we turn around to him and we say, the very fact that you did not disrupt him within the 3 years is a proof, is a proof that it must be true. You must indeed have sold it to him because you would never be mochel for 3 years.
Right? It's not really true to say it if he didn't say anything the first 3 years. It's really saying if he didn't say anything in the 3rd year. The normative thing for a person to do is not to raise an objection in year 1, either in year 2, because then they're fine with that. It's only really in year 3. So you're actually saying really the only year that matters is the failure to say something in year 3. That's true.
That's true. And that is really a little bit the essence of what the Gemara's problem is with this. Look what the Gemara says now. Omale Abaye, so Abaye says back to Rava, always Abaye and Rava, right? And if that's true, if that's the logic, ki hodra ara, when the land goes back to the owner, tihader, it should go back lebar miperi, apart from the fruit. In other words, he shouldn't have to return the fruit that he consumed for the first 2 years. Okay. So this means like this. Let's say someone it comes along after 2 years, not 3 years, and stakes a claim to the field, right? After 2 years, okay? No chazaka, after 2 years. He stakes a claim and he says, that field that you're living in is mine. And the other guy says, what do you mean? You sold it to me. Who do we believe? Well, he doesn't have a shtar. So who do you believe? The original owner. We explain ourselves cheskas more kama. Here's the chazaka. Remember, there are 2 chazakas here. There's the chazaka of the guy who's been there, living there, and there's the chazaka of the more kama, the chazaka of the original owner, who's coming with the chazaka that he was the original owner, which no one disputes. The guy doesn't dispute that you used to own it. Remember, yeah, he doesn't dispute that. He's got a chazaka. So if it's less than 3 years, we go with the chazaka of the original owner, right? Okay, different type of chazaka. Yeah, it's not a chazaka of 3 years, it's chazaka of being the original owner, right? Now this is the halacha, right? And therefore, what happens now? He's got to give the land back. But if it was true that it's assumed that a person forgives and lets a person off year 1 and year 2 in terms of the usage of the land, the consumption of the fruit, then even if he gets his land back, he shouldn't be able to claim the consumption of the fruit back. And the Gemara says, Aloma Omar Rav Nachman, why did Rav Nachman say, Hodra Ara v'Hodri Peri, that the land goes back and the fruit goes back? Rav Nachman establishes the following din. He says that in the event that you have not been there for 3 years, and someone else turns up and says, this field is mine, and you stole it from me, and you don't have any documentation that you bought it, in which case the halacha is that you've got to give it back. Not only do you have to give back the land, but you have to pay back all of the benefit that you've had during those 2 years. And you'll tell me it's obviously because you're a thief. Well, obviously you've got to pay it back. You're a thief. You stole it, right? We've established you're a thief. But if it was true that a person is moichel, what does the word moichel mean? It means to forgive. If it's assumed, if the whole logic around chazaka is that a person is not makbid on a few years, so why can't I at least turn around and cut my losses and say, all right, I agree, you've had me, I've been had, what can I do? I can't keep the land. I'm gonna have to give you the land back because I've got no chazaka and I haven't got any documents to prove it. But the fruit, what do you mean? You didn't interrupt me, you forgave me, you let me off. And therefore, it must be wrong. It must be wrong. That approach cannot be the logical argument, right? Okay. Yeah. Let's see Rashi.
This suggests that why should the fruit be separate to the tree if it's part of the same produce?
Pardon?
Why should the fruit be separate to the tree?
Well, no, because there's the land, or the tree and the land, whatever, and then there's the fruit. There's the benefit that you've had.
Yeah, but
If we say that there's an assumption that a person, an owner, is moichel, right, the first couple of years, and it's only right, then why should I have to pay back the fruit? What for? You've been moichel, you've forgiven it, right? Remember, we're talking about someone who only turns up, right, in year 3. That means the owner, in the case we're dealing with here, he turns up before the end of the 3 years, so he can get his land back, right? But why should he be able to get the fruit back from years 1 and 2? You were mochel. So that's why Rabbi says you cannot be correct. We're not talking now about source for chazaka or no source for chazaka. You're factually incorrect. It's not true that a person is mochel. That can't be correct, right? It doesn't fit with the fact, that you're allowed to claim back all of the fruit from the previous 2 years. So it's factually incorrect what you're saying.
We're assuming that he doesn't mind that the guy stole his.
He does. It's not a question of mind, doesn't mind. Rava must be wrong when he said that's what Abaya's claim is when he assumes that people are mochel, and Rava accepts that. He gives a different answer. He accepts that he must be wrong.
No, that's a mechanics question.
Yeah.
So Abaya is saying that Rava must be wrong because he's quoting Rav Nachman. So.
No. So this is obviously the accepted halacha.
I see. So
Also, Hilchos of Rav Nachman Medini as well. Yeah. I mean, it's a fair point. You could say you could dispute Rav Nachman. Yes. But I mean, Hilchos of Rav Nachman. I think the halacha is often like Rav Nachman in Dini as well. But it doesn't seem to be that doesn't seem to be a disputed point, and that's why Abai can bring it as a knockout blow. It's a fair point. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be in conflict. Rashi says. Mochilinish, al peres kakoil adam oichlon. A person forgives the fruit of his land to someone who eats them. Elameato, if so, given the asri, right? Given the atrei shon in mochil. Since a person forgives 2 years, right? Tehade ara, the land should go back. The land should go back from someone about whom a complaint comes at the end of 2 years. Tehada ara lebailim, the land should go back to the owners. Lebar miperi, apart from the fruit. Why? Because he's forgiven that. Alom Rav Nachman lekamon b'shmaitin. Why did Rav Nachman say later on in our sugi, in our Gemora, and that's of course the end of Rashi. I mean, literally. No, that is Adkan Pirish Rashi's Zatzal. It's amazing how it ends in the middle of a sentence. It's literally in the middle of a sentence. There is no, as if that he was writing this parish. Maybe he was literally writing this parish on the last day of his life. It's an amazing thing. Could be. And we said in the Pisa edition, it says Khan Mace Rashi Zal. This is when Rashi passed away. We've got the text Khan Pirish Rashi Zal. The Khan Elach Pirish Rabbeinu Shmuel ben Reb Meir. From there onwards is the explanation of Rabbeinu Shmuel ben Reb Meir, Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam. Here to the end of the Masechta is the commentary of the Rashbam, and you will see as we go through it's Hashem how the Rashbam differs to Rashi. The principal way in the Rashbam difference to Rashi is much lengthier. It's more word. It doesn't mean it's more complex. It means the Rashbam's style. Rashi is very, very concise. The Rashbam is goes to greater lengths in terms of developing ideas and themes. We'll see. Alama of Nachman lekama mishmaitin. So he picks up where Rashi left off. Lekama mishmaitin later on in our Gemora, regarding one who makes a chazaka in his friend's land, the other one goes and brings witnesses to Ochlan, Tarch, and Shnin that he consumed it for 2 years, no more. For Amar Rav Nachman says, you got to give back the land and the fruits of 2 years. So that doesn't fit with the argument that a person is assumed to forgive consumption of the fruit for the first 2 years. So we're going to have to take a different approach. There are 3 in total. Okay, just to understand how this Gemara is set up, there are 3 approaches that Rava takes to explain the logic of Cheskas Shalosh Shanim. This is a really important Gemara because this is the basis of all this whole thing, right? Number 1 and 2 are knocked out by Abaye, and number 3 succeeds. Okay, so number 1 we've already explained, we've dealt with. Now Rava has a second approach. Elo my Rava, rather Rava said like this. This is the logic. Shato Kamaisa, the first year, loy kopid inish. People are not particular. They're just not particular. That's not the same as saying moichel. Don't forgive anything, right? You're just not bothered. Don't bother. Tarti low kopid, 2 years, other people also not bother. So the difference is that the way we said it before was you actually forgive it. It's yours.
So he's saying it's my land. I'm forgiving it.
Here we're not. That's what we said before.
He's
don't think it's my land.
No, he's not.
Yeah. Sorry, he's saying it's my land, right? But he's moichel. He thinks, okay, never. This guy's in my land. Why is he in my land? Maybe he's hungry. Why is he taking my house? Because we always go. We think of land. Of course, there's also houses, right? Why is he living in my house? Right?
No, I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah. Why is he living in my house? Maybe he's got a problem. He's got nowhere to live. Whatever. So I'm moichel. That's how Robert said it before. I'm moichel. The first few years, the person is moichel. It doesn't mean everyone is moichel, right? It doesn't mean everyone is moichel, right? But by not objecting to someone living in your property, the other person cannot prove that you didn't still stake your claim in ownership. We're not saying everyone is moichel. We're not saying, I don't think Rob is saying everyone forgives. Everyone is in particular. Some people are very particular. Some people are particular. See the guy one day, they're particular. But the point is the person who's squatting in the land or is in the house wants to use that as an argument for ownership. Do you understand? You didn't object, must be mine. That doesn't work. Why? Because the owner or basing can make an assumption. It's within the realm of possibility, that this landowner, we originally said the original approach we had was he forgives a couple of years, right? And now we're saying, now we're moving away from that because that doesn't work. Factually, he must be wrong because we know that he has to return the fruit. So clearly he's not being moichel anything. He's not forgiving anything, right? But we can say it's within the realm of possibility that a person is not particular for year 1. He's not particular for year 2. I'm saying is I'm just suggesting that it's not that we're saying everyone is a makpid. You can think of many examples of people who be makpid, right? But it means that a person who wants to stake claim for ownership on the basis that you didn't object, right, for the first 2 years, the owner can make a counterclaim and say, what do you mean? You know why I didn't object? Because I wasn't makpid. I'm not makpid. I might have 15 properties in this city. So I thought 1 property, I'll let you stay in. But
How's the difference between Michael? I don't understand. He's basically being Michael.
He's not. He's just not objecting.
Turning a blind eye.
Not objecting. But when you have the chutzpah to claim ownership, right? To claim ownership. In other words, when you have the chutzpah to actually claim that the field is yours, I jolly well will not be mochel anything. I'll thank you very much. You'll pay me back. You give me the land back, and you pay all the fruit you took. There's a difference between not being makpid and not being mochel. One is I'm going to turn. One is I can say I just didn't bother. Right? I didn't bother. It doesn't mean I wasn't mochel anything. It's much easier to understand lo makpid than lo mochel. Plenty of people will say, right? I didn't get around to it. So I knew there was a guy squatting in the property, but I thought, okay, he's an ebuch. I can't be bothered. I'm too busy. I've got no time to to deal with this now, right? I'll deal with it, I'll deal with it what? When it matters, yeah, exactly, right? But that's not the same as saying being mochel. A little bit, yeah. It's a different. Does that make sense?
So kind of, yeah.
We'll keep working on it. So the Gemara says, that's what Rabbi says. 2 years of people are also not makpid. Talas kopid. 3 years they are makpid. Now look at the Rashbam. Second Rashbam. Tarti lo kopti. Al masha ze yored l'soch sodeh shachaver below shosoi. He's not makpid on this one going into his field without permission. From you, however, peri lo mochil. He doesn't forgive the fruit. He just doesn't object. Talas kopid. 3 years he's makpid. Hoil the shileish be'ivalto, because he triples his sin. Likones below rishus habaylim, to enter without permission of the owner. If there's someone is silent for 3 years and he didn't object, he's definitely sold it. So then it transforms from a position of just a well, I wasn't particular, whatever, to suddenly a proof of ownership. The fact that you didn't work mucker for 3 years, I can then, me, the squatter, and bring that as proof, right? That it must be that it's true that you sold it to me. So otherwise you would have objected. Now the Gemara said the problem with this approach is, Amalei Abai says, well, that's all well and good, but Elamiato, if it's all based on how much you're makpid, how particular you are, you could go and honey de Bei Bar El Yashiv. There was a certain family, the house of Bar El Yashiv, de Kopti, Afila Aman de Cholef HaMitzra de Tu. These people were super makpid. We've always met people like this, right? We've all met people like the Bei Bar El Yashiv. Okay, the Bei Bar El Yashiv, if someone like stepped onto their land, like the foot went on, that's literally what it says. Someone passed by their border, they would be out there with a sign, get off my land, that type of this type of person. We've all met these people. Okay, Hachinami, here as well, you're going to say Dila Alta Havi Chazaka. It should be Chazaka immediately. If you are lucky enough, to have encountered a bit of property owned by the Elyashiv family, you should be able to claim Chazaka after 1 day. Why? Because the Elyashivs are so makpid that they never ever let anyone go. They never let anyone be in their land and not throw them off. And therefore, if you come to Basin with Aiden, that let's say for a day you were squatting in the land, should be a proof that you own it. You're going to say maybe that's true. Maybe for Elyashiv land, right? It's true. You can claim ownership on this basis, right? On this basis after 1 day. That can't be. And Cain of Sono Sata to would never work. The system would never work. You'd end up having a different rule for one rule for some, one rule for others. It's impossible. You can never keep track of it. You have to start getting instead of a loss adjuster, you're going to have to get like an assessment, a hakpoda assessment. Great thing. Can you imagine? Well, this person is my.
I feel like I'm queued up for one.
Okay. You cleared up for most things in Israel. Yeah. Bureaucracy, Israeli bureaucracy. So you hakpoda assessment. This person is makpid on a week. He's makpid on a month. He's makpid on a day. And then it's impossible, right? We never do that. You have got to have a system that is consistent and works and is what is it? One rule for what was it again? One rule for everyone, no? It's got to be one rule for everyone.
Universal.
Universal. It's got to be universal rules, otherwise the system doesn't work. Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. Johnny, you look like you had a question forming in your mind there, but what?
Yeah, I think. Well, I feel like you're still in midpoint. So.
Well, only have to do the Rashbam. That's the end of Rob's second approach. Abai has well and truly defeated it. He's defeated it. Let's be clear. Before he defeated it on factual grounds. The first argument on factual grounds is you're factually incorrect because you can't say that a person is mochel because I'm telling you they're not mochel because you've got to pay back the fruit, right? This one he's defeated on procedural grounds. Yeah, and it's procedural grounds. In theory, what you're saying makes sense, right? Hakpoda, depends on hakpoda, right? But procedurally, that can't work, right? Because then you have to follow it to the logical conclusion, which is hakpoda is a personal thing. It's clearly dependent on the individual, right? How makpid the person is, and if so, you're going to have a massively complicated rule book that depends on each person, and we don't do that. We don't implement rules like that.
But obviously, it's a good challenge. Otherwise, how long to countered it.
Not necessarily, because we've got to see that. We've got to see that. We might come back and use this. We'll see. Go on.
My problem with that approach is what we're saying is exactly like you described it. It's a rule that we say apply across the board.
Yeah.
But that's exactly the point. You wouldn't pick on somebody who's from the house of Eliashib because they would typically be makbid and they've not, so that we should say, oh,
No, you would pick on them.
No,
it's a great place to squat. You
can
would
get away with one.
You can get away with one day. I know the Eliashib family have gone on holiday. I'm going to jump into their land.
Straight in.
Yeah, no, but because what we're
No, I
saying
would if I was a gunner, but I'm not.
what we're saying is, as a general cloud, you look at the principle in its as a whole. Typically speaking, yes, you're going to get people who are not particular.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're applying a standard.
Yes, you have to.
That
That's right.
standard is a standard of 3 years. Typically speaking, somebody won't be particular in year 1, won't be particular in year 2, but will be from year 3 and on. So therefore,
You mean that's Robert's response?
I'm saying that could be an easy response back to Abaye. You're picking on Bnei Eliashib. So what? So what? You're giving me a random sort of like outlier scenario to try and disprove a concept or an idea. To me, that doesn't seem like a good challenge, and I don't really understand.
You're saying that Robert should respond.
Yeah, just say
Okay.
that.
You take the medium case. You take the
you just take the
Jew on the Eged Takana.
medium. You take the mean case, the common case, not a random. You don't take from an
The extreme
outlier.
case,
Only
the
that.
medium case prove themselves. The extreme case is what you argue about. Everything else is
So-
wrong.
Also, wouldn't Robert just argue straight
The
away?
extreme
that
case is what
After
the
the day.
definition prove or prove.
Obviously, no one loses a star after a day. Principally speaking, we're saying here,
We're losing start. We're going to get to in a second, right? That's what we're going to get to.
yeah, after the Peskas Habatim is because after 3 years,
Well, that's
no documentation.
well, we haven't actually done that. I mean, we've spoken about it because that's the conclusion, but we haven't got there yet. We're assuming we haven't got that. Then. For Rover's argument, let's leave the star. Let's leave the star out of the question. It's true. That's fundamentally where we'll get to. But let's leave that out of the question in a second.
So Abaye comes back on
Abaye, yeah.
logic.
Yes, that's right.
But Robert's using a psychological argument.
Rover's saying that there's all.
Just his psychological.
He's saying that this is how it works in terms of how a person is not makbid, and therefore that doesn't prove ownership. After 3 years, it proves ownership. And it seems to be that the reason why Rava then moves away after Abaye's question, to come back to sort of Johnny's point, is because it's not good enough simply to say that the Mishnah took an average. It took 3 years and therefore defined a change in ownership on the basis of that average. Because of Abaye's question, Rava seems unhappy. It's insufficient. Yes, it makes sense in purely legalistic terms, but the logic isn't there. There's no logic to say anyone, if I'm makbid after 1 day, then why are you pushing me into the 3-year category? And the people will be all over the place. It's not good enough to say that this massive deal, which is a huge thing, right? Changing ownership on the basis of what is essentially an arbitrary possible average.
But isn't it also maybe it's
We're
more
not doing
that.
possible. Yeah.
Maybe it's the concept of being makbid itself is not definable enough.
Could be. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Therefore,
Yes. So it's not good enough.
because in something, I'm trying to think of a counterpoint, but in the category of being a makbid, we know that that it's so wide a
Yes.
definition
Yes. Yeah.
that it cannot be the measure by which we use because of the variety of potential.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Exactly.
Whereas something is more
Yeah.
defined of some obvious ones, like you've got a star.
Yes.
That,
Yes.
That's very defined.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Or there's a period
yeah.
of time.
Yeah.
Yes, the
Yeah.
time is defined.
Yes.
Is it 2 years, 1 year, 3 year?
Yeah.
whatever?
Whereas
You
this
can't
is
argue it.
this nebulous
can't.
thing. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Exactly. 1 second. I want to see the third one. I want to make sure we get to the third one because I was yeah. Is that yeah?
The 3 is a foundation move out of possible.
No, it's not. We're going away from specific.
Moved away.
Logic, only logic.
I know it's not.
That's it. No possible.
But the basis of the logic.
Nope, no. Pure logic. We are pure logic.
Logic based on what?
Logic.
Sorry.
No, pure logic. You have 3 in other contexts, not relevant to us. Seriously, logic. You'll see. Yeah. Now this is 1 second. Let's just see Rashi. A second Rashbam. Sorry, last copied. We did that. Oh, one Rashbam. They didn't object. Somebody goes into the property of Beit Bar Yashiv. They didn't object. Therefore, we would assume that it's yours. So the Gemara says, Ela Omar Rava. Rather, Rava says, and here you see the little aleph because it's brought down in halacha. Shata Komaisa, the first year, Mizdar Inish Bishtore. A person is particular about their documents. Tarti Utlas, Mizdaher. Now, there's a bit of a change. The person is careful in the second year and careful in the third year to look after their documentation. Tvei Lo Mizdaher. Person is not particular more than 3 years. And therefore, if you didn't object within 3 years, it's a proof that, right, that there was no need for me to keep my documentation. Not necessarily a proof that you own it. There's no need. We'll get to that in a second. Let's take Rava at the very basic and simple level. What happens at the end of 3 years? No proof that I own it. Just no counterproof against my claim of ownership from the fact that I ain't got no documentation. At the end of 3 years, normally there's a massive problem with my claim, which is, if it's yours, yeah, where's the piece of paper? That's the problem, right? At the end of 3 years, that problem disappears because people do not keep documents longer than 3 years. Okay, that's what happens. Okay, now the question is, okay, how does that make you own it? How does that transfer ownership to you? You no longer have a problem with the fact that you don't have a document because we don't expect you to have a document longer than 3 years, right? But it doesn't mean necessarily prove you own it. And that's what the Ketos HaChoshen is going to help us with in a minute, right? First, we have to understand, right? First, we have to understand what exactly, look, Abai doesn't give up. Omale Abai. Abai said to Rava, Elo me'ato, if so, if so, an objection which is not in front of him should not be a good enough objection. Now, we mentioned this the other week, right? You're allowed to make the owner, if the owner objects anywhere that it's anywhere where it's possible for the objection to reach the owners of, not the owners, the squatter, if he objects anywhere where the objection could reach the ears of the squatter, the halacha is that that's a good objection. And that means that he no longer can come along and say, I didn't bother keep my documents, because everyone will keep documents if they know someone's after the land. Everyone, right? So that's no longer, you have to keep your documents forever because you know someone's after the land. Abai says, if the logic is that no one is careful after 3 years, so why is it that an objection shelo b'fonov, why is that a good objection? Da'omalei, he should be able to say back, if you had objected in front of me, I would have been careful with my document. You know why I didn't bother keeping it? Because you were miles away. You didn't object in front of me. Why should I bother? It's not a serious objection. Not a serious objection, right? The more answers, because you can say to him, Chavroch, your friend, Chavro Isne has a friend, and the friend of your friend has a friend. So, in other words, this is a bit of a side move, this little piece, because we're just sort of clarifying what it means not to be careful with your documentation, right? If we're saying that after, the Gemora says like this, if we're saying that a person is only careful in the documents for 3 years, okay, that means to say that if there's an objection during the 3 years, you will have to keep your documents for longer. So Abai says, if so, you should have to object directly in front of him, because otherwise he can always say, I didn't bother keeping my documents because you didn't object in front of me. It wasn't something which I had to think about. So the Gemora says, no, because you knew from any objection I made, right, that I would logically assume that that objection would reach your ears, because news travels fast, right? People have friends, the friends have a friend, right? Someone's gonna tell you about it, and therefore you should have kept hold of your documents. And the fact that you didn't is a proof that you don't really own it, and really you're lying, okay? Really you're lying, and you don't really have any documents because you stole it, right? That's the argument. Now look at the Rashbam and explain this. There's one Rashbam, just one. If you objected in front of me, I would have been careful with that document more than 3 years. And he answers, your friend has a friend. And you did know that I objected. Had you been bought, had you actually come by it by legitimate means, you should have been careful with your document for more than 3 years, for longer than 3 years. The fact that you didn't shows, that you're actually a ganav, you actually stole it. Okay, again, what has Rava done here?
You're ganav, you stole it.
Well, you're lying. Remember, you've got two people here. There's a turn and a nitan, claim and counterclaim. I'm squatting in the land. I am claiming this land is mine. You turn around to me and say, prove it. I say, I can't prove it. Why can't I prove it? Because I lost the documentation, right? Why did you lose documentation? Because it's been 3 years. I don't have to keep my documents forever. He says, what do you mean? You knew that I was running after you. So obviously you should keep your documentation. So why did you not keep your documentation? You know I didn't keep your documentation because you don't really have any documentation. Because you never bought it.
It's probably me and everybody else who's.
No, it's...
Can I just
It's
clarify?
you. Go on.
There's the guy who's on the land at the moment.
Yeah, squatter.
He's the nitan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you got the tone. Tone's coming along and
Yeah.
saying, this land
Is mine.
is mine. You, nitan, have effectively stolen the land.
Yes.
And then Basin says, well, where's your proof, Tone?
Yeah.
The fact that Tone doesn't have a proof after 3 years, doesn't have a star to hand, which he should have had.
Yeah. That's a proof that what?
Means that he must have sold it legitimately to the nitan.
Who doesn't have a proof? The
If
Toyan.
Toan doesn't have
What proof has he got? He doesn't need a
if
proof.
he doesn't have documents.
He doesn't need documents. The Toyan doesn't need documents. The Toyan is the original owner, right? The original owner has cheskas morikama. He comes along by saying, this was my land. Everyone agrees it was my land. Therefore, I'm taking it back. Thank you.
So why at the end of 3 years?
Oh, what
does the
happens?
nitan not
So-
having the stock.
This is it.
Team that somehow that
This is it.
because to me,
Yes,
it sounds
yes,
like the whole thing is that
That's why we need this. 4 minutes. We might have to do it again next time. But that is why we need this. Because there's a fundamental problem which the Professor Choshen asks on Rava. This is the conclusion of the Gemara. This is it, full stop, right? I mean, there's more Gemara to come. But this is a full stop. This is the end of this piece. Rava's conclusion is that it's all to do with the fact, right? The concept of 3 years is a logic, not to do with a posuk, it's logical. And the logic is that a person doesn't keep their documentation for more than 3 years, which means, Shmuel, come to you in a second, which means if you don't keep your documentation for more than 3 years, it means if someone turns up at your door or at your field after 3 years and says to you, excuse me, this is mine, you can legitimately turn around and say, you sold it to me. And when you turn around and say, where's your documents? I can say to you, why should I keep documents for 3 years? I don't keep documents for more than 3 years. And therefore what? And therefore what? And therefore what? Therefore it's yours. Like, why does that make it yours? All you've done is proven, yes, all you've done is proven that you didn't need to keep your documents. There's no need to have a document. Why does that mean it's yours? Why does your chazaka being in the land 3 years, beat my chazaka of the morikama, of the owner, the original owner? What was your problem, Shmuel?
If we're going based on logic and not positive, then why instead of doing chazaka, why don't we just say that if someone claims that a property is theirs and then they're found to not be true, like in Zeman, they'll just get a Zeman punishment, they'll have to property themselves, then no one will do that.
No one will do what?
So no one will claim that a property is theirs unless they know that it is.
No one will claim the property. Well, you mean why would they? Well, they want to claim it's theirs, right? But what basis do you have to claim it's yours? Just because you're in the land?
No, I'm saying the person who claims that someone has squatted on their land.
Oh, you mean where does he get his claim from?
Why can't we just say that he has to bring proof? Otherwise, if he just claims that he'll like an agent and he'll have to pay the value of the house and then or however much he would have got, and then no one will do that because
No, but if the question is, if you come along and say this field is yours, and everyone knows that you were the original owner, no one's disputing you're the original owner, so I don't need to prove that I was the original owner. The person in the land also agrees that you were the original owner. He says it's true. You used to own the land, but I bought it for you.
So I think the question is why you put the equal Adam Zimmerman to the idea of
Why was it? Why? In what way?
because if that wasn't the case, you pay fair penalty.
No. Well,
Why don't you apply the principle of Adam
well,
Zimmerman?
that's a specific halacha. It's got specific rules. Yeah, it's got specific rules around edus and how that works, how you can disprove. Yeah, I think in terms of moving the concept, but here the fundamental issue we have to deal with, which is what the Ketsos deals with. He quotes the Ramban and then he gives his own pshat. And I want to do it properly. We'll do it next time. But I want to, basically, does everyone understand what we've done here with the Gemora? We've basically said, well, no, it's what we've done. What we've done is we've tried to establish by logic, right, how Cheskas Shalosh Onim works.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Why didn't Abaya come back to Rabbi on this argument and say, like the Bar and Yoshids, even have different, some people keep their stars for 10 years. They're very particular. Some only keep them for 1. So why can't you use that logic on this argument?
It seems to be that this is more acceptable. It's more acceptable from a logical perspective to give a broad-based approach to how long people generally keep documents for. It's not quite the same as Hakpada. Hakpada is a very personal thing, right? Am I makpid on my land? Some people more, some people less, right? When it comes to how long people are assumed to keep their documents for, it seems easier to give an average. That's a balabatish answer.
Is that less? Is it less that this is what people do, and more that the established practice, a little bit like today in today's world, you have to keep.
Yeah, it could be its established practice. Yeah, it could be. This was the established thing that people would do. Yeah, like. Yeah, it could be. But fundamentally, all we've done is we've established why it is that it's not a reasa, it's no negative thing, the fact that you haven't kept your documentation. That's what we've done. That's what Rovers proved, right? And the problem the Ketsos grapples with, which is where one of the ways he's going to do it, he's going to pull in the idea of Hakpada again, you'll see, right? Is there has to be still a mechanism, a halachic, way in which me with my 3 years chazaka beats your original owner chazaka, right? So that we weigh things up. Fine, we remove the star problem, but we still have to have a logical reason to actually say, okay, ownership is not yours, but it is yours. Okay, you understand? And that we'll have to do that in Mitzvah Hashem next time. Unfortunately, that's going to be after Shavuos because there's no shir next week because I'm away. I'm in a conference in Germany, and then is Yom Tov. So yeah. Anyway, you can take these if you want. It's a fascinating thing to learn if you have time over the next 2 weeks. There's 2 pages, Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. I think it's marked, whatever. But we'll Mitzvah Hashem go through it next time. Pardon? Is there a minion? Yeah.